The chapel's ancient stones remember when gold meant everything. They remember when eyes blazed with the Erd Tree's blessing, when death was a forgotten concept, when the very air shimmered with divine favor. But now, in this moment of awakening, they witness something far stranger. A figure rising from death itself, eyes dim and dulled, yet somehow perceiving what even the most faithful cannot see. A thin thread of golden light stretches across the weathered floor, visible only to one who should be blind to all things holy. This is where our story begins, not with the blessed, but with the forsaken. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we unravel one of Elden Ring's most fundamental yet paradoxical mysteries. Why the Tarnished, stripped of the Erd Tree's grace and cast out as pariahs, can suddenly perceive divine guidance that eludes even those who still carry gold in their eyes. The contradiction strikes at the heart of everything the lands between represents. Here stands a realm built upon divine hierarchy, where your worth is measured by the golden gleam in your gaze, where society itself structured around who bears the Erd Tree's blessing and who does not. Yet when the world needed salvation most desperately, when demigods warred and the very concept of order shattered, it wasn't the faithful who received visions of golden paths forward. It was the exiled, the forgotten, the ones whose ancestors were literally stripped of divinity and told never to return. The Tarnished see sights of grace, not despite their fallen status, but perhaps because of it, though the true reason runs deeper than simple irony. To understand this phenomenon, we must first grasp what grace actually represents in the lands between. Grace is not merely a blessing or a mark of favor. It functions as the fundamental connection between the divine and mortal, a golden thread binding souls to the Erd Tree's eternal cycle. When inhabitants of the lands between possessed grace, it manifested most visibly in their eyes, painting them with aureate light that marked them as chosen, protected, beloved by the greater will itself. But grace extended far beyond cosmetic blessing. It granted effective immortality, ensuring that upon death, souls would return to the Erd Tree, cycling through its roots in an endless golden spiral that Queen Marika called perfect order. The loss of grace, then, meant more than social exile. It represented a fundamental severance from the world's governing system, a casting out not just from society, but from the very metaphysical structure that defined existence in the lands between. When Marika stripped Godfrey and his warriors of their grace, she didn't merely dim the light in their eyes, she cut them loose from eternity itself, condemning them to true mortality in distant lands where the Erd Tree's roots could never reach. They became tarnished not through sin or failure, but through divine decree, their banishment serving purposes that would only become clear generations later. Consider the weight of that first moment when Godfrey, mightiest of all Elden Lords, felt the gold fade from his sight. Fresh from victory, having conquered the last enemies that threatened the Golden Order, he stood before his goddess queen as she spoke words that would echo through ages. "My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die." The cruelty seems absolute, heroes rewarded with exile, champions repaid with banishment. Yet hidden within Marika's pronouncement lay seeds of something else entirely, a promise disguised as punishment. She spoke of death, yes, but also of what would follow death, of grace returning when the time was right, when the lands between needed warriors unbound by the very order they would be called to either restore or destroy. The Tarnished who followed Godfrey into exile lived harsh lives in the Badlands beyond the fog. They fought, they struggled, they died, true deaths without the Erd Tree's embrace to catch their souls. Their descendants inherited not just their bloodlines, but their fundamental disconnection from grace, generation after generation, born with dim eyes and mortal fates. Yet something else passed down through those bloodlines, something dormant, waiting, a potential for sight that the perpetually blessed could never achieve. When the Elden Ring shattered and the Golden Order collapsed into chaos, that potential suddenly awakened. The call went out across the fog, reaching into lands where the Erdtree held no sway, summoning the descendants of the Banished back to a home most had never known. But here's where the mystery deepens beyond simple recall of exiles. Not all Tarnished who returned could perceive the guidance of grace. Many wandered the lands between as lost as any hollow soul, unable to see the golden trails that would lead them toward their destiny. Some gave in to despair, others to madness, still others to simple purposelessness, becoming merchants or mercenaries or merely victims of the chaos that gripped the realm. The ability to see grace, to follow its guidance towards sites where its power pooled, belonged only to a select few among the already select. What distinguished these Tarnished from their equally forsaken kin? What special quality allowed some to perceive divine guidance while others remained blind? If you're finding value in this exploration of Elden Ring's deepest mysteries, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to dive ever deeper into the intricate worlds that captivate us all. The answer begins with understanding that grace in the lands between exists in multiple forms, each serving different purposes within the Golden Order's design. There's the grace of blessing, that golden light in the eyes that marks one as chosen. There's the grace of the Erdtree, the metaphysical connection that prevents true death. And then there's the guidance of grace, those streams of light that only certain individuals can perceive, leading them toward specific destinations with deliberate intent. These are not the same phenomenon, though they share a common source. The grace that Marika stripped from Godfrey was the blessing and the connection, but the ability to perceive guidance that operates on entirely different principles. Sites of grace, those pools of golden light scattered throughout the lands between, predate the Tarnished's return by ages uncounted. They served as waypoints of power even during the Golden Order's height, though their true purpose remained hidden from most who dwelt in the realm. These sites mark locations where the Elden Ring's power naturally concentrates, where the barriers between the physical and the divine grow thin. During the age of the Erdtree's dominance, these sites hummed with quiet power, maintaining the invisible architecture that kept the Golden Order stable. But when the Elden Ring shattered, when the Demigods claimed their shards and warred for supremacy, these sites transformed from passive anchors into active beacons. The Shattering changed everything about how grace functioned in the lands between. Without the Elden Ring's complete structure to channel and direct divine power, grace began operating according to older patterns, or perhaps according to contingencies that Marika herself had encoded into the system long before she took up her hammer against the ring. The sites of grace stopped merely existing and started calling, sending out signals that only specific individuals could perceive. Not the demigods, despite their divine blood and great runes. Not the citizens still bearing golden eyes. Not even the two fingers, those interpreters of the greater will's intent. The signals reached only the Tarnished, and among them only those who possessed something the others lacked. That something was death itself, or more precisely, the experience of death and resurrection that marked a true Tarnished champion. The game's mechanisms reflect deeper lore. When a Tarnished falls in battle and returns to a site of grace, they're not simply respawning for gameplay convenience. They're experiencing a fundamental aspect of their nature, a death and rebirth cycle that sets them apart from every other being in the lands between. The inhabitants with grace in their eyes cannot truly die. Their souls return to the Erdtree. Those without grace, like ordinary Tarnished, simply die and stay dead. But the player Tarnished and others like them exist in a third category. They die, truly and completely, yet return through a mechanism that bypasses the Erdtree entirely. This resurrection ability connects directly to their capacity to perceive grace's guidance. Each death is a journey beyond the veil, a glimpse into the void between worlds where different rules apply. In that space between death and return, the Tarnished's perception shifts, attunes to frequencies that living beings cannot detect. they come back changed, not physically but perceptually, able to see the golden threads that connect sites of grace across the lands between. The more they die, the more clearly they can perceive these connections, until the guidance becomes as clear to them as sunlight to ordinary eyes. Melina's role in this process provides crucial insight into how grace guidance actually functions. She is not a finger maiden, despite serving a similar purpose. She exists in a bodiless state, burned and bodiless, yet able to perceive and interact with grace in ways that even empowered Tarnished cannot. When she first approaches the protagonist, she tests them, evaluating whether they truly possess the guidance of grace or merely claim to. Her ability to appear only at sites of grace suggests she exists partially within the same perceptual framework that allows Tarnished to see guidance. A liminal space between life and death, between the physical and the divine. Her connection to Marika, though deliberately obscured, adds another layer to the mystery. Melina speaks of being given purpose by her mother inside the Erd Tree, tasked with acting as kindling to burn the thorns that bar the way to the Elden Ring. If Marika is indeed her mother, as evidence strongly suggests, then Melina represents a direct link between Marika's will and the Tarnished's journey. She can see grace because she was designed to, created or modified specifically to guide those who would answer grace's call. Her burned and bodiless state might not be damaged but deliberate design, placing her in the exact perceptual state needed to bridge the gap between divine intention and tarnished action. The two fingers present a competing interpretation of grace and its guidance. These entities claim to speak for the greater will, interpreting its desires and directing the Tarnished toward becoming Elden Lord. Yet their relationship with grace seems more parasitic than symbiotic. They cannot grant grace. No Tarnished gains golden eyes through their blessing. They cannot see grace's guidance themselves. They rely on finger maidens to interpret and convey what the Tarnished perceive. Most tellingly, when confronted with the reality that the greater will has long since abandoned the lands between, they freeze in contemplation for ages untold, unable to adapt or respond. This suggests that the two fingers are not the source of the Tarnished's ability to see grace, but rather opportunistic entities attempting to hijack a system they don't fully control. The true source of guidance likely comes from Marika herself, or from contingencies she embedded in the Elden Ring before shattering it. The two fingers' interpretation of that guidance, always pointing toward claiming great runes and becoming Elden Lord, serves their agenda of restoring the Golden Order, but it may not reflect the guidance's true intent. Consider how grace actually guides the Tarnished through the lands between. It doesn't simply point toward the nearest demigod or the most direct path to the Elden Ring. Instead, it leads them on a winding journey that ensures they witness the full scope of the Golden Order's failure. They see the academy where sorcerers war against the faithful. They witness the rot-consuming Khalid, the eternal battle in the capital's depths, the horror of those who live in death. Grace guides them not just toward power, but toward understanding, ensuring they comprehend exactly what they're being asked to either restore or replace. This educational aspect of Grace's guidance suggests deliberate intent beyond simple navigation. Someone or something wants the Tarnished to see everything, to understand the full context before making their choice about the world's fate. The guidance leads to optional areas that provide crucial lore, to hidden bosses that reveal secret histories, to NPCs whose quest lines illuminate different aspects of the conflict. A Tarnished following Grace exclusively would still encounter most of the game's crucial narrative elements, as if the guidance itself serves as storyteller, ensuring its followers understand the complete picture. Marika's echoes throughout the game provide the strongest evidence for her role in the Tarnished site. She speaks directly to them at various points, her words reaching across whatever barrier separates her from the physical world. I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way, our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. These are not the words of someone defending the status quo, but of a goddess questioning the very order she helped establish. Her desire for understanding over blind faith aligns perfectly with Grace's tendency to lead Tarnished toward revelation rather than simple victory. Even more telling are her words to Godfrey and his warriors before their banishment. "Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death, warriors of my Lord." Lord Godfrey. This wasn't exile, it was preparation. She sent them away to become something the lands between had never seen. Beings who understood death, who grew strong through mortality rather than despite it. When she shattered the Elden Ring, she activated the second half of this ancient plan, calling back warriors specifically shaped to either repair or remake the world according to their judgment. The mechanism by which Tarnished perceive Grace, then, operates through a combination of factors that Marika deliberately orchestrated. First, the removal of Grace freed them from the Golden Order's constraints, allowing them to develop outside its influence. Second, their mortality in the lands beyond gave them intimate knowledge of death, something impossible for those within the Erdtree's embrace. Third, their resurrection upon returning to the lands between placed them in a unique state, neither fully alive nor dead, neither blessed nor entirely forsaken. This liminal existence allows them to perceive divine guidance that exists outside normal perception, to see the golden threads Marika wove as contingencies into the world's fundamental structure. But not all Tarnished achieve this state merely by returning to the lands between. The call of Grace reached many, but few could follow its guidance once they arrived. The distinguishing factor appears to be ambition, or perhaps more accurately, the strength of will to pursue a seemingly impossible goal despite lacking any divine mandate to do so. Tarnished merchants speak of losing sight of Grace, of the guidance abandoning them when they gave up their ambitions. Sir Gideon Ofnir pursues knowledge with enough fervor to maintain his connection to Grace. Bloody Finger Hunter, Yura follows his own mission with sufficient dedication to remain guided. The guidance responds not to worthiness or virtue, but to determination itself. This creates a fascinating paradox where Grace, traditionally a symbol of divine favor granted from above, becomes something earned through mortal struggle from below. The Tarnished don't receive Grace because they're chosen because they refuse to surrender, despite having every reason to do so. They pursue an impossible throne without divine mandate, face demigods without divine blessing, and persist through deaths that would break anyone who hadn't already experienced true mortality. Their ability to see Grace is not a gift, but an achievement, earned through the exact struggles that their exile was meant to create. The sights of Grace themselves respond to this earned sight in telling ways. They don't simply provide guidance. They restore the Tarnished, strengthen them, allow them to channel runes into power. These are not passive waypoints, but active participants in the Tarnished journey, suggesting that the sites themselves have been waiting for beings exactly like the Tarnished to arrive. The Grace pooled at these locations was never meant for the golden-eyed inhabitants of the lands between. It was always intended for those who would come later, those who could see it only after experiencing death and choosing to continue despite that experience. Torrent's role adds another dimension to understanding why Tarnished can perceive Grace. This spectral steed chooses its rider with careful deliberation, as Melina notes with surprise. Torrent previously belonged to someone Melina clearly respected, someone she describes as having a connection to the guidance of Grace. The steed's ability to be summoned and dismissed suggests it exists partially in the same liminal space where Grace's guidance becomes visible. When Torrent chooses the protagonist, it's recognizing something beyond mere potential. It sees someone who exists in the proper state to perceive and follow divine guidance that operates outside normal reality. The relationship between Grace and the great runes further illuminates how Tarnished perception functions. Demigods bearing great runes cannot see the guidance of Grace, despite possessing fragments of the Elden Ring itself. Their divine nature, their golden lineage, their inherent connection to the Erdtree, All of these should grant them superior perception of divine will. Yet they remain blind to the golden paths that lowly Tarnished follow with ease. This inversion suggests that proximity to divinity actually impairs the ability to perceive certain forms of grace. The demigods are too enmeshed in the system to see its mechanisms, too blessed to perceive the guidance meant for the Forsaken. When Morgoth defends Leyndell against all Tarnished, he does so from a position of tragic irony. Born cursed, bearing omen horns that mark him as reviled, he nonetheless possesses grace in his eyes and considers himself a defender of the Golden Order. He cannot see the guidance that leads Tarnished to his doorstep, cannot understand why these graceless beings believe they have any right to claim lordship. From his perspective, the Tarnished are deluded invaders following false visions. He doesn't realize that the grace he defends and the guidance they follow might serve the same ultimate purpose, just from opposite directions. The Two Fingers finger readers and finger maidens provide an interesting counterpoint to direct grace perception. These intermediaries can interpret grace's guidance for Tarnished, who cannot see it themselves, translating divine will into comprehensible instruction. Yet their translations are imperfect, filtered through their own understanding and agenda. They tell Tarnished to seek the Elden Ring and become Lord, but they don't mention the other paths grace might illuminate. The paths that lead to the Three Fingers, to the stars, to the burning of the Erd Tree itself. Their incomplete translations reveal that grace's guidance contains more information than they're willing or able to convey. This raises questions about what the Tarnished actually perceive when they see grace's guidance. The golden light appears simple, a glowing trail pointing in a direction, but perhaps it contains layers of meaning that most Tarnished cannot fully interpret. Perhaps what appears as a simple directional indicator actually contains complex information about purpose, consequence, and choice. The protagonist's unique ability might not just be seeing grace, but understanding its full implications in ways that even finger maidens cannot translate. Ranni's questline provides crucial context for understanding grace from outside the Golden Order's framework. She explicitly rejected her Empyrean flesh and the destiny the Two Fingers intended for her, yet she can still perceive and interact with forms of grace that others cannot see. Her dark path of night and stars represents an alternative to the Golden Order, yet it doesn't oppose grace itself. It opposes the narrow interpretation of grace that the Golden Order enforces. When the Tarnished aids her, grace's guidance doesn't disappear or lead them away. Instead, it seems to accommodate this alternative path, suggesting that grace's true nature transcends any single order or interpretation. The frenzied flame presents the ultimate test of grace's relationship with the Tarnished. When the protagonist accepts the Three Fingers' embrace, they don't lose the ability to see grace. The guidance remains visible, still pointing toward sights of grace, even as the frenzied flame marks them for an ending that would destroy everything grace supposedly represents. This persistence suggests that the ability to perceive grace is not tied to serving any particular divine will, but rather to the fundamental state of being, tarnished, caught between death and life, between divine and mortal, between order and chaos. Even Melina's threat to kill a lord of frenzied flame doesn't negate their grace sight. She promises to deliver destined death, yet the Tarnished would simply return at a sight of grace, still guided, still pursuing their chaotic goal. The guidance persists regardless of the Tarnished choices, supporting any path they choose to walk. This unconditional persistence reveals something profound about grace's true nature. It doesn't judge, doesn't discriminate, doesn't withdraw based on moral choices. It simply guides, allowing the Tarnished to use that guidance however they see fit. The merchants imprisoned beneath Leyndell tell their own story about grace and perception. Buried alive for the crime of being different, they called upon the frenzied flame in desperation, summoning the antithesis of order into the world. Yet before their imprisonment, they were simply merchants, wanderers who traveled the lands between with their own understanding of the world. Some theorized they could see forms of grace that the Golden Order didn't recognize, that their different perception marked them as threats to established order. Their fate warns of what happens to those who see differently in a world that demands uniform vision. Grace's guidance through catacombs into Deathroot suggests awareness of Godwin's corruption and the existence of those who live in death. The guidance doesn't avoid these beings that exist outside the Golden Order. It leads directly to them, ensuring the Tarnished understand this fundamental breakdown in the Erdtree cycle. Someone or something wants the Tarnished to see that the Golden Order has failed in its most basic promise, that death has escaped its control and created new forms of existence that grace cannot touch. Yet the Tarnished, existing in their own state between life and death, can interact with these beings in ways that those bearing traditional grace cannot. The ability to strengthen its sights of grace through runes reveals another aspect of why Tarnished possess unique perception. Runes are fragments of the Elden Ring's power, scattered throughout the lands between after the Shattering. Most beings cannot directly absorb and utilize this power. It requires a specific state of existence that allows one to channel divine energy without being consumed by it. The Tarnished exist in exactly this state, forsaken enough to avoid destruction, yet connected enough to grace to channel its power. Their perception of grace is not separate from their ability to grow stronger through death. Both arise from the same liminal existence. When examining why Tarnished can see grace, we must also consider what grace is seeing through them. If Marika embedded contingencies in the system, if she orchestrated the Tarnished's return as part of a greater plan, then Grace's guidance might represent her continued will, acting through the world's fundamental structure. The Tarnished become her eyes in a world she can no longer directly perceive, her hands in a realm she can no longer touch. Their ability to see grace is matched by Grace's ability to see through them, creating a reciprocal relationship where divine will and mortal ambition merge into something entirely new. The golden seeds that strengthen the flask of crimson tears grow from minor Erdtrees throughout the lands between, yet only the Tarnished can perceive their true value and utilize their power. These seeds represent grace in its most concentrated form, the Erdtree's blessing crystallized into physical form. That Tarnished can not only see but absorb and utilize these seeds suggests their perception of grace goes beyond simple sight. They can interact with grace in ways that should be impossible for the graceless, manipulating divine power through sheer will rather than blessed authority. Sacred tears found at churches throughout the lands between tell a similar story. These crystallized tears of the gods should be invisible to those without grace, yet the Tarnished collect them easily, using them to strengthen their flasks and enhance their survival. Each tear represents a moment of divine sorrow, a fragment of godly emotion made manifest. The Tarnished's ability to perceive and utilize these tears suggests they exist closer to divinity than their forsaken status would suggest. Not through blessing, but through the unique perspective that comes from experiencing both divine connection and complete severance. The walking mausoleums present perhaps what appears to be the strangest interaction between Tarnished and grace. These massive constructs carry the bodies of demigods who died without achieving godhood, wandering eternally as monuments to failed ambition. The Tarnished can not only perceive the importance of these mausoleums, but can duplicate the remembrances of slain demigods within them, creating echoes of divine power that shouldn't exist. This ability to replicate divine essence suggests the Tarnished operate by different rules than any other beings in the lands between, capable of manipulating the fundamental forces that others can only obey. Grace's guidance to optional bosses in hidden areas reveals intentionality beyond simple progression. The guidance wants Tarnished to face Moog in his Palace of Blood, to discover Melina in the roots of the Halleck Tree, to uncover secrets that the Golden Order would prefer remained buried. Each revelation adds context to the Tarnished's choice about the world's fate, ensuring they understand not just the current crisis, but its roots and implications. The guidance serves as educator as much as navigator, creating Tarnished, who are informed enough to make meaningful decisions about the future. The phenomenon of cooperating Tarnished adds complexity to understanding grace perception. When one Tarnished summons another, they share perception of Grace's guidance, working together toward goals that should be mutually exclusive. Only one can become Elden Lord, yet Grace guides them to aid each other, suggesting that the journey matters more than the destination. Perhaps the true purpose isn't to crown a single lord, but to create multiple beings capable of understanding and reshaping the world, even if only one ultimately claims the throne. Invading Tarnished present the opposite phenomenon. Those who can see grace but choose to hunt their own kind. They follow the guidance to find other Tarnished, then attempt to destroy them, harvesting their runes and preventing their progress. Yet grace doesn't abandon these bloody fingers. The guidance continues to show them the way, accepting their predation as a valid path. This moral neutrality suggests grace's guidance operates on principles beyond good and evil, concerned only with creating beings strong enough to face the choice ahead, regardless of how they achieve that strength. The Crucible Knights, remnants of an earlier age before the Erd Tree, cannot see modern grace despite their incredible power and divine connections. They served Godfrey in ancient times, yet when the Tarnished face them, there's no recognition, no shared understanding. They remain locked in their ancient duty, unable to perceive the new forms of grace that guide their former lord's descendants. This blindness suggests that grace's guidance is not simply about power or worthiness, but about existing in the correct temporal and metaphysical state to perceive it. Godfrey himself, when he returns as the first Elden Lord, presents the ultimate example of a Tarnished who transcended the need for grace's guidance. His eyes remain dim, yet he knows exactly where to go and what to do. He no longer needs to see the golden paths, because he has internalized their purpose, understood their destination, and chosen his own route to that end. His transformation back into Hor-Ra-Lu, warrior of the Badlands, represents the full circle of the Tarnished journey, from graced to graceless to something beyond both states. The revelation that Radagon is Marika explains much about Grace's contradictory nature. If the goddess who banished the Tarnished and the god who would oppose their return are the same being, then Grace's guidance represents a form of divine self-argument. The Tarnished become pawns in Marika's internal conflict, guided by one aspect of her nature to potentially destroy another. Their ability to see grace stems from their position outside this divine paradox. They can perceive the guidance because they're not bound to either side of the god's dual nature. The Elden Beast, as the living incarnation of the Elden Ring and the Greater Will's vassal, should be the ultimate source of grace in the lands between. Yet it cannot see the Tarnished coming until they stand before it, cannot perceive the guided path that leads to its destruction. This cosmic blindness reveals the ultimate truth about why Tarnished can see grace. They exist in a blind spot of divine perception, occupying a state that the Greater Will never anticipated and cannot directly observe. Their sight comes from standing where gods cannot look, perceiving from angles that divine eyes cannot achieve. Understanding why Tarnished can see grace ultimately requires accepting multiple simultaneous truths. They see it because Marika designed them to, creating a contingency for the world's transformation. They see it because their unique state between life and death allows perception of liminal divine energy. They see it because their ambition, and will earn them the right to guidance that judges worthiness through struggle rather than blessing. They see it because someone needs to see the full scope of the Golden Order's failure, and make an informed choice about what comes next. The guidance of grace is not a reward for faith or a mark of divine favor. It's a tool for transformation, visible only to those positioned to use it. The Tarnished see grace because they need to see it, because without that sight they would remain what Marika made them. Exiles without purpose, warriors without a war. The golden light that guides them through the lands between is simultaneously gift and curse, opportunity and burden, divine will and mortal ambition made visible in threads of light that only the Forsaken can follow. In the end, the question isn't really why Tarnished can see grace, but why grace chose to be seen by Tarnished. The answer lies in the fundamental nature of transformation. True change cannot come from within a system, but must be imposed from outside. The Tarnished represent that outside force, shaped by exile to see what the blessed cannot, strengthened by death to survive what the immortal cannot face, guided by grace to choose what the divine cannot decide. They see grace because grace needs to be seen by eyes that don't take it for granted, that understand its value through its absence, that can imagine worlds where it works differently or doesn't exist at all. This truth transforms our understanding of the entire journey through the lands between. Every sight of grace becomes a moment of conspiracy between goddess and exile. Every golden trail represents Marika's finger pointing from her prison, showing the Tarnished what they need to see to make the choice she cannot make herself. Every death and resurrection reinforces the unique state that allows this perception, deepening the Tarnished's connection to the liminal space where grace's guidance lives. The Tarnished don't just see grace. They complete it, fulfilling a circuit that Marika left deliberately broken, waiting for the right kind of beings to close it in ways she could never fully predict. As we reach the conclusion of this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's most fundamental mysteries, we see how the question of why Tarnished can perceive grace opens into something much larger. It reveals the genius of Marika's plan, the tragedy of the Golden Order's perfection, and the necessity of those who stand outside systems to transform them. The Tarnished see grace not as a simple game mechanic or narrative convenience, but as the culmination of centuries of planning, divine rebellion, and the careful cultivation of beings capable of choosing the world's fate with eyes truly open. Thank you for joining me on this exploration into the golden mysteries that guide the Forsaken through the lands between. Here at Keen 7 Lore, we believe that understanding these deep narratives enriches not just our gameplay, but our appreciation for the artistic achievement these worlds represent. If this investigation has illuminated new aspects of your journey as a Tarnished, or if you find yourself perceiving the golden trails with new understanding, please consider subscribing to support the channel. Your engagement helps us continue these deep dives into gaming's most intricate lore, unraveling the mysteries that make these worlds so endlessly fascinating. Until we meet again at the next sight of grace, remember, sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see the path forward. The greatest sight comes not to those blessed with vision, but to those who earned it through blindness, struggled through darkness, and emerged with eyes that see what gods themselves cannot perceive.